There is an island at the edge of the South Atlantic, so remote that ships rarely passed it by accident. The British chose it deliberately. They needed somewhere a man could not escape from. Not because of what he might do if he escaped, though that too, but because of what he represented. A single human being who had, for 15 years, redrawn the map of the known world with his own hand. His name was Napoleon de Bonaparte. He died on that island, 51 years old. Overweight, sick, stripped of every crown, every army, every title. Talking to servants about battles that had ended a decade before. Dictating his memoirs as though history owed him one final argument. And here is the strange thing. He wasn't wrong. We are still talking about him. Which raises a question that goes far deeper than military strategy or political theory. What does it cost a human being to need that badly to be remembered? This is not a story about conquest. This is a story about a wound that never healed. A hunger that was never satisfied. A man who built an empire not because he loved power, but because, somewhere deep inside, he believed that without it, he simply didn't exist. What does this reveal about being human? That we will sometimes build the entire world in order to escape a single feeling we had as a child. Before he was Napoleon, he was Napoleon. He was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, a place that had been transferred from the Republic of Genoa to France just 1 year before his birth. He was French by accident, by paperwork, by the timing of a political transaction he had no say in. His family was minor Corsican nobility, respectable on the island, invisible in France. His father, Carlo, was charming and ambitious but ultimately ineffective, a man who wanted more and achieved less. His mother, Letizia, was the opposite, severe, unsentimental, iron-spined. She raised 8 children with the efficiency of someone who understood that the world would not be kind to them, and who decided her job was not to soften that truth, but to prepare them for it. Napoleon absorbed both. At 9 years old, he was sent to a military school in mainland France. Brienne, Les Châteaux. He arrived speaking French with a thick Corsican accent. His classmates noticed immediately. Children always notice the thing that makes someone different, and they make sure that person knows they've noticed. He was mocked for his accent, for his name, for the way he pronounced it, for being from an island most of them couldn't locate on a map. He responded the way many wounded children respond. He retreated inward and built something harder there. He studied, obsessively, mathematics, history, military strategy. While other boys socialized, he read. While they formed friendships, he formed opinions. He became excellent, and excellence became his armor. But armor is not the same as healing. Years later, when he was first consul of France and then emperor, he would still carry this thing inside him. This reflexive need to prove. This low-grade alarm that was always running, you don't belong, you haven't done enough, they'll see through you. The boy from Ajaccio never fully left. He just learned to dress him in imperial uniform. What does this reveal about being human? That the wounds we receive before we have language to describe them become the architecture of everything we build afterward. We think we're building towards something. We are often building away from something. He graduated from the École Militaire in Paris in 1785. 1 year, when the program normally took 2. He was 16. The examiners noted his exceptional ability in mathematics and his aptitude for artillery. They did not note warmth. They did not note ease. They noted precision, efficiency, and an almost unsettling capacity for focus. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant. He was, by every measure, at the beginning of a perfectly ordinary military career. Except that nothing about Napoleon Bonaparte was oriented toward the ordinary. In the years that followed, he watched France tear itself apart. The revolution came. The king was executed. The terror consumed thousands. The world he had trained to serve collapsed and rearranged itself almost weekly. A lesser man might have kept his head down literally and figuratively. Napoleon watched and calculated. He had an instinct that others lacked. He understood that chaos is not the enemy of ambition. Chaos is its opportunity. Stable systems have established hierarchies. Stable systems have people who've been waiting in line for decades. Stable systems reward patience. Revolutionary France had no patience for patience. He attached himself to the right political factions. He demonstrated his military value at Toulon in 1793, a siege where his artillery strategy was decisive, and where, at 24 years old, he was promoted to brigadier general. He was 24. He had found the door, and he had walked through it at a sprint. What drove him wasn't simply career ambition. It was something more primal. Every promotion was evidence. Every victory was proof. Proof against the boy with the wrong accent. Proof against every classmate who had laughed. Proof against the invisible ledger of slights and dismissals he had been keeping since childhood. He wrote letters during this period that reveal the interior life behind the exterior momentum. Letters to his brother Joseph. Letters to Josephine, the woman he would marry and love with an intensity that alarmed even him. In those letters you find something unexpected: longing, loneliness. A man who could command armies but couldn't quite figure out how to rest inside a human relationship without turning it into another campaign. What does this reveal about being human? That hunger is never really about what we say it's about. We say we want success, recognition, love. But underneath those wants is always a quieter, more painful question. Am I enough? Do I matter? Will I be seen? He married Josephine de Beauharnais in 1796. She was 6 years older than him. A widow. Sophisticated, connected, at ease in the social world he found exhausting. She moved through Parisian society with a lightness he envied and couldn't replicate. He was still, in many ways, the provincial outsider still learning the grammar of belonging. He was devoted to her, in a way that made him, privately, ashamed. He wrote her letters when he was on campaign in Italy that are almost unbearable to read, not because they're eloquent, though some are, but because of what's underneath them. A man who had trained himself to need nothing, needing something desperately. "You are the only thought I have," he wrote. "The universe has for me only you in it." She received the letters. She did not always reply. She was, by most historical accounts, not particularly in love with him. She had other attachments. He suspected. Then he confirmed. And rather than process this as a man who deserved to be loved well, he processed it as a man who had always known that he would ultimately not be enough. He did what he did with every painful thing. He buried it. He accelerated. The Italian campaign of 1797 was one of the most extraordinary military performances in European history. Napoleon, commanding a demoralized, underfed French army, outmaneuvered Austrian forces repeatedly through a combination of speed, deception, and an almost supernatural ability to read terrain and enemy psychology simultaneously. He won. And won. And won again. But watch him closely during this period and you'll notice something. He couldn't let the victory settle. Each one had to be followed immediately by preparation for the next. He slept 4 hours a night. He worked 18. He wrote and dictated at a pace that exhausted his secretaries. He was afraid not of losing, though he hated losing, but of stillness. Because stillness meant sitting with himself. And sitting with himself meant the fear had room to speak. The fear that said, "You are still that boy. You have not outrun him yet. You will never outrun him." What does this reveal about being human? That our greatest achievements are sometimes the most sophisticated forms of avoidance. We move so fast, build so much, accomplish so thoroughly precisely because we cannot bear to sit in the silence where the wound still lives. In 1799, he returned from Egypt. The Egyptian campaign had been, by any objective standard, a failure. The French army was stranded, the fleet destroyed by Nelson at the Battle of the Nile, the strategic objectives unachieved. Napoleon left his army behind and sailed home. He returned to France, a hero. This is the thing about Napoleon that historians still struggle to fully explain. His relationship with narrative was as sophisticated as his relationship with artillery. He understood instinctively, almost viscerally, that perception shapes reality more than facts do. He didn't lie, exactly. He curated. He understood which details to amplify, which to let fade, how to frame a retreat as a strategic withdrawal, how to turn a military disappointment into a story about destiny. He arrived in Paris to find a government in crisis, the Directory, weak and corrupt, collapsing under its own contradictions. France was exhausted. It had been through a decade of revolution, terror, and instability. It wanted order. It wanted someone to make decisions. On the 9th of November 1799, 18 Brumaire, by the revolutionary calendar, Napoleon seized power in a coup d'état. He became first consul. And then, in 1804, he did something that still stops historians cold. He crowned himself emperor. He was crowned. He crowned himself. In Notre Dame Cathedral, in front of the Pope who had traveled specifically to perform the ceremony, Napoleon took the crown from the altar and placed it on his own head. The message was not subtle. I do not receive power from God, from the church, from heredity, from tradition. I receive power from myself. I am my own origin. I am self-created. It was the most psychologically revealing act of his career. Because he didn't just want to be emperor. He wanted it to be known that no one had given it to him. The boy from Ajaccio, with the wrong name and the wrong accent, standing in the greatest cathedral in France, refusing to let even God take credit. What does this reveal about being human? That self-made people often can't accept gifts. That when your identity is built on the story of your own creation, allowing someone else to crown you feels like a betrayal of everything that got you there. Even gratitude can feel like surrender. At his peak, Napoleon controlled or influenced more of Europe than any single person since the Roman Empire. He had redrawn borders, installed his brothers as kings of Spain, Holland, and Westphalia, forced coalitions of the most powerful monarchies in history to their knees, and sat at the center of a continental system that stretched from Portugal to Poland. He had also done something quieter, and in many ways more lasting. He had changed how the world was organized. The Napoleonic Code, the civil legal code he commissioned and drove through in 1804, established principles that still govern legal systems across Europe, Latin America, and beyond. Equality before the law, property rights, religious freedom, the abolition of feudal privilege. These were not the acts of a simple conqueror. These were the acts of a man who genuinely believed in the principles of the revolution, even as he simultaneously dismantled its politics. He could hold this contradiction without apparent discomfort, champion of liberty, crowned autocrat. He surrounded himself with brilliant people, but could not tolerate being challenged by them. He wanted capable subordinates, not genuine advisors. He wanted people who could execute his vision, not people who might complicate it with their own. This, too, was the wound speaking. Because a man who is secure in himself can welcome doubt, can sit across from someone smarter and feel curious rather than threatened. Napoleon could not. His confidence, which appeared total, was actually a structure that required constant maintenance. A challenge to his judgment wasn't just professional disagreement. It was an attack on the edifice. And the edifice had to hold. He loved France genuinely, deeply, in his way. But France was also a mirror. France was the proof. The Emperor of the French was the fullest possible answer to every person who had ever made Napoleon Bonaparte feel small. He needed France to keep reflecting him. He did not consider fully what France needed from him. What does this reveal about being human? That the need for validation never scales. It doesn't get satisfied by more success. A man who needs a mirror will always need a bigger one. The achievement doesn't heal the wound. It only raises the stakes of the next attempt. He should have stopped in 1807. After Tilsit, where he met Tsar Alexander I on a raft in the middle of the Niemen River, and essentially divided European dominance between them, Napoleon was at the height of his power. Britain remained resistant, but Britain was an island. Continental Europe was his. He should have consolidated, built, governed. He couldn't, because consolidation requires accepting what you have. And accepting what you have requires believing that you are enough. And that belief was the one thing Napoleon had never been able to fully reach. The Peninsula War began in 1808, an intervention in Spain that became a grinding, humiliating entanglement that drained French resources and morale for years. His generals warned him. He didn't listen. In 1812, he invaded Russia. 600,000 men. He expected a decisive battle, a swift Russian capitulation, and a return to Paris in glory. He had defeated Austria and Prussia with this formula. He had defeated coalitions. He had defeated everyone. Russia didn't cooperate. The Russians retreated. They burned their own crops. They emptied their own cities. Moscow was abandoned and then set alight rather than surrendered. Napoleon sat in the Kremlin waiting for a peace offer that never came. Then winter arrived. Of the Grande Armée that crossed into Russia, roughly 100,000 returned. He had known, on some level, that the odds were poor. He had been warned. He had received intelligence that he processed and then overrode. Because this was no longer just strategy. This was compulsion. He was chasing something that kept moving the proof, the final proof, the achievement so total that the boy inside him would finally be silent. Russia was the country large enough to hold that chase. And it swallowed it whole. What does this reveal about being human? That obsession and dedication look identical from the outside, and only the internal experience distinguishes them. Dedication asks, what does this require from me? Obsession asks, what does this prove about me? One builds. The other, eventually, consumes. He was exiled twice. The first time, in 1814, to Elba, a small island off the Tuscan coast. He was given sovereignty over it, given a small court, given a pension, given, essentially, a comfortable ending. He escaped after 10 months. The 100 days that followed his return to France, his reclamation of power, his final campaign culminating in Waterloo, are usually told as a story of military failure. They are more accurately a story of psychological compulsion. He didn't return because he had a plan that would work. He didn't return because the odds favored him. He returned because the alternative, accepting the ending, was the one thing he could not psychologically perform. Sitting on Elba, comfortable and defeated, was sitting with the boy from Ajaccio. It was hearing, finally, with no armies to drown it out, the original fear. You were never enough. You were always going to end up here. He couldn't sit with it. Waterloo, the 18th of June, 1815. The defeat was not, in the end, primarily about Wellington's brilliance or Blücher's Prussian cavalry or the infamous delay in beginning the morning's engagement. Those things mattered. But Napoleon at Waterloo was not Napoleon at Austerlitz. He was sick stomach ulcers, possibly hemorrhoids, so severe he could not ride properly during the critical hours. He was slow. He was uncharacteristically hesitant. He was, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, tired. After Waterloo came St. Helena. Not Elba, no comfortable sovereignty this time. The British had learned. They sent him to the most remote island they controlled, and they made it clear this was permanent. He spent 6 years there. He dictated his memoirs. He revised history, presenting himself as the champion of liberty who had been brought down by the forces of reaction. He quarreled with his British custodians. He organized and reorganized the tiny household staff with military precision, because the need to command anything, never entirely left him. He complained about the damp. He complained about the governor. He complained about the wine. He died on the 5th of May, 1821. His last words reportedly, France, Army, Josephine. 3 things: country, purpose, love. All 3, in the end, taken from him. All 3 things he had reached for and held and lost. The country had survived him. The army had been defeated. And Josephine, whom he had finally divorced in 1809 inches pursuit of a dynastic heir, choosing the empire over the person, had died in 1814, before his exile was even complete. He had chosen the proof over the person. And then the proof was gone too. What does this reveal about being human? That we are always making trades we don't fully understand. We trade presence for achievement, connection for ambition, enough for more. And often we don't discover the cost of the trade until there's nothing left to trade with. There's a version of Napoleon's story that we tell to children in military academies and business schools. In that version, he is a template. Study him, apply his principles, and win. But that version is incomplete because it stops at the peak and draws the lesson from the summit. It doesn't follow him to Elba. It doesn't follow him to St. Helena. It doesn't sit with him in the damp of that final island, an old man at 51 talking to servants about Austerlitz. The full story is harder and more honest. Napoleon was one of the most genuinely gifted human beings who ever lived. His intelligence was extraordinary, not just the military intelligence, but the legal intelligence, the administrative intelligence, the political intelligence, the almost inhuman capacity to process information at speed. He built things that lasted. The Code Napoleon outlived every single empire he created. The reorganization of French education and law and infrastructure that he drove still shapes France today. He was real. His gifts were real. And his wound was also real. And the wound drove the gifts, and the gifts could never repay the wound. This is the tragedy, not Waterloo, not St. Helena, not any single defeat. The tragedy is that he built everything to become someone who no longer felt like the boy with the wrong name. And it worked, in the world's eyes. The world saw Emperor Napoleon, architect of modern Europe, history's most studied military commander. But inside the emperor, the boy was still there. Still keeping the ledger. Still waiting to feel like enough. He never did. There is something in us that wants to believe that if we achieve enough, we will finally outrun the original wound. That success is the cure. That recognition is the cure. That power is the cure. Napoleon is the most thorough historical test of that belief. And he is also its most thorough disproof. Because he had everything the wound said he needed, and the wound did not close. It only got louder. What does this reveal about being human? That the work of becoming whole cannot be done from the outside in. Empires don't heal childhoods. Victories don't answer the original question. The only place the wound can be addressed is the place it lives, not in the world, not in history, not in the verdict of posterity. Inside. In the quiet. In the sitting still. In the willingness to be, without proof, without achievement, without a crown, enough.